Eva Gnostiquette, and welcome to the 13th and spookiest yet episode of Frequency Resonance Radio. Today is Monday, the 31st of October, aka Halloween 2016 EV, so Merry Spookmas. Currently, it is 22:51 Eastern Standard Time. The vibes are good for dressing up as the Sun trine Neptune at 0417, then at 0449, the Moon in Scorpio sextile Pluto. At 2244, the Moon will sextile Mars, and then turn void of course. Trines blend the energies of the planets and constellations. The Sun empowers Neptune, ruler of the stage, and adds an empathetic and magical flourish to today's activities. So on with the show. Is. The idiocy of the word haunts me. If it were abolished, human thought might begin to make sense. I don't know what anything is, I only know how it seems to me at this moment. Quote from Robert Anton Wilson, writing from the perspective of Sigismondo Cellini in the Historical Illuminatist Chronicles. Yes, that's right, we'll be shooing away some spooks of the mind with General Semantics, the system developed by the engineer and Count Alfred Korzybski for clear thought. Now, for some basic concepts you need to know about General Semantics. There is the semantic response, or the evaluative response. This term refers to the total response to thing events, that is, the thing that is there and the event that is happening put together, not just the word meaning. This response is neurological, emotional, cognitive, semantic, and behavioral. It encompasses every way that a person responds to something. Example, for instance, I'm afraid of spiders, so my semantic response to seeing a large spider is my fear, my pheromones going out, the electricity in my nerves, the vibes I give off, my girly shriek, the chemicals running through my blood, my heartbeat getting faster, my anticipation of getting bit, etc., etc. Next, there's abstraction. The map that Korzybski used to explain the structure of experience is called the structural differential. 6 arbitrary levels of abstraction, for instance, according to the structural differential, would be starting at 0, the thing event, which is what is possible to perceive, what is actually perceived, the description of the thing event, the description of the description, and even the description of the description of the description, and this can go on for infinity. For example, one could say this episode, the recording, number 1, this episode, 0, this episode, no, number 2, the recording, or no. Got way too far ahead of myself there. This episode, the recording of the episode, the events leading up to the recording of this episode, the aftermath of the recording of this episode, the YouTube video, the audio file, the computers that I use, the microphone that I'm using, the camera that I'm using, the hearthis.at audio host, etc., are all part of the thing event that is this episode. What you see and hear is the perceived object, that's level 1. The title and description are the description of the thing object, that's level 2. What I say about it is a description of that description, level 3, etc. I'm embedding level 3 in a level 0 and level 1 right now, so the thing event is something that Korzybski believed we cannot know fully, although Gurdjieff, Steiner, and other mystics would disagree, because it includes every single thing about it, from the particle movements at the subatomic level to information outside of human perception. It occurs in at least one spatial dimension and at least one temporal dimension. Multiple thing events can occur simultaneously, such as are all happening right now. The lamp behind me, me talking, the episode recording, the computer shuffling around files and bits and whatnot. But due to the linear nature of the human mind, unfortunately, as we know it, we cannot perceive the whole thing event, but perceive it as an object processed through our senses, our eyes, our ears, our nose, mouth, skin. Even on the object level, we do not perceive everything. An example would, for instance, be Wittgenstein's duck rabbit. See this little critter here? If you look at it one way, then it looks like a duck. Look exactly at the left part of the duck rabbit. It looks a lot like a duck. Then look at the right part and you see that it looks a bit more like a rabbit. Your first impression of this will be... Everybody's first impression of this will be different. Some might actually see it as just a big blob of nothing. Some will actually see it as something else entirely, maybe sort of a Cthulhu-like thing, I don't know. Point is that we're not perceiving everything about it all at once, we're only perceiving a part of it. The semantic response to the object is yet another abstraction, and the linguistic description of the object is an abstraction from our abstraction. Abstraction is not inherently wrong, though. It is part of the process of initiation, of what some might call enlightenment, for instance. However, when we are confused by our own abstractions and mistake our map for the territory, that's where the problem results. The duck rabbit we just saw is a pattern of pixels on a screen originating from an ink drawing made by a psychologist to demonstrate pretty much this very concept, but we perceive it as either a duck or a rabbit. Of course, if you're listening on audio, you won't be able to see it at all. I hope you're familiar with it. If you're not, then you can just probably Google it or Yahoo it or ask.com it if you're really into retro search engines or whatnot. DuckDuckGo it if you're into privacy. Each level of abstraction tells us less about the thing event. Each level of abstraction tells us less and less and less. For example, on one level, you could say, I'm listening to a podcast recorded by Eva Gnostiquette on the subject of General Semantics. On the next level up, you could say, I'm listening to a podcast about philosophy. On the next, you could say, I am listening to something. And on the next, you could say, I had a sensory experience. Another principle of general semantics is the principle of non-identity. The world is constantly changing. At the thing event level, for instance, electrons constantly leave atoms in the thing event to be replaced by other electrons. Our brain cells are constantly being destroyed and rebuilt and replaced by others at the molecular level. Our bodies, in 7 years, will most likely have an entirely new set of atoms from now. Even two mass-produced items are not completely identical. The pitfalls of identification are numerous. It enables bigotry and unclear thinking, inobjectivity, subjectivity, you name it. For instance, let's say Alice and Bob are both criminals. You already probably have a picture in your mind of who Alice and Bob are now. But wait, what if I told you that Alice is a cannibalistic serial killer, but on the other hand, Bob broke the speeding limit in a school zone while it was not particularly active? Still both criminals, but the scale is very, very different. There's something very different about speeding in a non-active school zone versus killing people and eating them. Yes, Halloween. Yet, if I was to identify both of them as criminals, by the way, this is a good time to look up the non-central fallacy. Eva on Less Wrong, also known as Scott Alexander, who writes Slate Star Codex, the blog, has a really good post about this on Less Wrong. Non-central fallacy, look that up. You see, if I identify them both as criminals, I see them as being roughly equivalent regardless of the reality. If somebody, say, Carl or whatnot, has an STD, I would evaluate Carl based on what I know about STDs and those who suffer from them, even if it's something that's relatively innocuous, and he manages to live a happy life, or if he just got it from birth, or any other facts about his life. That's the problem with identification. Thinking in terms of is, in general, can be quite damaging to sanity in this regard, as we fail to grasp the similarities and differences between two different thing events. Another idea is knowledge, used in a very specific meaning in general semantics. Knowledge consists of structure being organization in which each part relates to other parts and sequences occur in some order. The order for an equation or a recipe is a good example, like you don't have knowledge if you just throw a pan in the oven, toss in an entire bag of flour, throw in a carton of milk, and expect a cake to form. The knowledge is how to produce the cake correctly. When we have the right relationships between the objects we perceive and the right order of them, we have knowledge. So knowledge is a map of the thing events that we perceive. A very important concept introduced by Alfred Korzybski is time binding. Plants have the ability to control the energy they take in and put out, thus they are energy binders. Animals have the ability to control the space they inhabit and are thus space binders. But people, we have the ability to pass on knowledge and experience from generation to generation through language, and thus we are time binders. And due to time binding, we are influenced by the past and by the future, and influence them in turn. Sorry, I have a bit of a stuffy nose right now. Some more interesting and fundamental concepts of general semantics are the two following. Non-allness. As we never experience the thing event in toto, we should remind ourselves to think in terms of etc. So, like listing items off that might be found in an office, you could never stop at any one item because offices vary so significantly. Pencils, pens, rulers, computers, monitors, speakers, keyboards, mice, desks, papers, phones, answering machines, etc. Non-elementalism is another foundational concept of general semantics. An elementalistic expression is one in which a thing event has been taken out of context and its relationships with other thing events omitted, whereas identification equates two mostly unrelated things based on perceived similarities. Elementalism separates two mostly related things based on perceived differences. For example, one thing we might all know, time-space. We cannot actually think of time without spatializing it, and we cannot think of space without temporalizing it, but we frequently speak of them as separate things, even though they're really not, technically. Once again, there is nothing wrong inherently with elementalistic expressions. so long as one remembers that they are elementalistic expressions and abstracting expressions at that. Here, of course, we find the main problems. One is confusing the object itself, that is, the object which is the thing we perceive, with the thing event itself. We have a tendency to confuse our perceptions of a thing event with the thing event itself. I'm basically repeating myself. For instance, let's say my pet cat nips at me while I'm petting it. I actually might think that it was angry and wanted me to back off, while it might actually have just been being playful. Cats do that, you know, for those who don't know cats. The big one, of course, and most of you probably know this saying already, is don't confuse the map with the territory. We respond to thing events in ways that give them meaning. An intention, that is intension, is a total semantic response to a word or image that comes from its definition and associations. The generally accepted intention of a dog is a four-legged barking pet. Like, my subjective intention of a dog may be a happy, friendly, licking thing, but another person, I've met people who have subjective intentions of a dog as a scary, bitey, growly thing. An extension is a perception of the object. The object referred to as a dog may be a nice licking thing in reality, or an unpleasant biting thing in reality. We get our intention from the word and its meaning, and our extension from our sense data. We may, however, having developed an intentional meaning for an object, continue to use that meaning despite what the extensional meaning may be. A tragic example can be like blind patriotism or nationalism, which may instill one with an intention that the nation is good and can do no wrong, and extensional data that said nation is committing atrocities is either rationalized away, ignored, or even outright denied, like with the Holocaust. Holocaust deniers have the intention that Nazi Germany was a good place and that Adolf Hitler was a good person, despite the overwhelming body of evidence, the extension that says that the Holocaust was real, it was an atrocity, it was a horrible thing. They filter that out, they deny it, they even try to debunk it, although their attempts are laughably poor. Let me just put it at that. Another example is how what's currently going on with Syria. We're supporting what we call moderate rebels in Syria. Only trouble is that it turns out that a lot of these moderate rebels are actually Islamist extremists, such as the Al-Nusra Front. Now, people who support the U.S. military intervention in Syria will say that this is not really as big of a problem as you might think. These are just on the peripherals. These are just fringe wackos, even though the extensional data suggests that these are a sizable portion of the fighters whom we are funding. Some people even outright deny that we're even funding these people, that it's just a whole thing that's made up by either crazy right-wingers like Donald Trump or crazy left-wingers like Jill Stein just to demonize United States intervention. When in fact, for the vast majority of the population, intervention, or as it actually is, war, is not favorable. So, we have some more very very interesting and useful concepts that are derived from general semantics right here. Multi-ordinality. A multi-ordinal term is one with the ability to be applied to statements containing that term indefinitely. For example, I may like something, and I may like that something because it gives me pleasure, and I dislike that I like something because it seems selfish, and I like that I dislike that I like something because it demonstrates my personality, and so on ad infinitum. It can go on forever. You can, take that example and run with it for so long. You ever heard the phrase, I just love being in love, people trying to, excuse, being philanderous or whatnot. Of course, no hatred to polyamorous people, that's pretty cool, but, just randomly cheating on people, not cool. Same goes for words like love, as I just mentioned, effect, cause, structure, abstract, proposition, difference, order, etc. A lot of the words that I'm using in exposing general semantics. There's also the concept of projection. Most of you have probably heard that one before, although more in a sort of Freudian context. If we are not conscious of our intentional meanings, we may project said meanings on the object and use those projections as proof of our intentions. The earth is flat, one might say. And another might say, well, no, it's not. I'm a scientist, I'm an astronomer, and I know that it's not. And, the first person might respond, you see, you're an astronomer. You're probably being paid off by NASA. You see, I knew it. I knew the Earth was flat. This is just further confirmation because, I have this evidence because, of course you would say that. You're being paid off to say that. And they'll believe it wholeheartedly. Objectification also can occur. This is not that person has a nice booty, but it's more like the error whereby we confuse the words themselves with the objects and memories and ideas with experiences which belong to the thing event level, or higher order abstractions with lower order abstractions. So basically, just projecting an ideal thing onto a concrete thing, essentially. Now, of course, we have to get to the consciousness of abstracting. This is the real meat and bones of what general semantics is about. Remembering that you and I both abstract, that identities are not true, they are transitory, they're ephemeral, and that there are almost always missing pieces to every puzzle, are the three major things in gaining consciousness of abstracting. Some techniques for this, for instance, are indexing, which is essentially discerning between two or more similar but fundamentally different thing events. As I mentioned before, bigotry starts from identifying all members of a group with one another. For instance, let's say I'm Jewish, so Jews. All Jews are scheming and greedy and whatnot. And this is how bigotry starts. The truth is that each member of any group is a separate individual and is different from the other members of that group. So instead of thinking in terms of, like, the Jews as a whole, you might try to think of it in terms of Jew number 1, Jew number 2, Jew number 3, Jew number 4, each of whom have different personalities and ideas and and thoughts and feelings and beings in general. They're chain indexes, which basically consists of discerning between two similar thing events at different times, even though they seem like the same thing event to you. Like, for instance, I am not the same person I was when I was 13 years old. I was a crunchy little twat back then. Nor am I the same person I was when I was 5. I was slightly annoying back then, although we had many similarities. Like, when you feel betrayed by somebody, and, like, you meet them years later, you may think, oh my god, it's that person who betrayed me. But the fact is that technically speaking, it's not. That person could have changed their mind, and you should always give them another chance. Quotes are another good tool. They should be used when discussing elementalistic terms such as time and space, because, of course, as we all know, they cannot be separated from each other. Hyphenation, as well, can help us avoid elementalism. Time, space, or mind, body, or matter, energy, etc. Now, thing events are unique. Now, here's where we get to similarities and differences. This is the core of General Semantics philosophy. Thing events are unique, and nothing is the same as anything else, but some thing events are similar to others, and some thing events are different from others. Nothing is ever identical, and nothing is ever completely different. Everything is related to everything else. Every thing event is part of the largest thing event of all, which I personally like to define as the mind of the infinite creator. So, of course, there's another topic in General Semantics that pretty much sums up pretty well what we talk about. And if I can get this to load, hopefully. Basically, we can categorize it as
present day.